Hi, everybody. In this session, we're going to focus on introducing journey mapping methodology in a sales conversation. The goal today is to learn how to incorporate journey mapping into the sales conversation to introduce the methodology to a prospect or existing brand. And I thought I would have Jen Lockenman help me out today. She and I worked together to do a Mass Mutual presentation where we introduced the journey mapping methodology, and she has some great insight into how it can be used in the sales conversation. So, Jen?
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. So what I'd like to just go through with you is we'll talk a little bit about where do you introduce journey mapping in the sales process and how does that flow? And then we'll wrap up with what are some of the next steps after that that you can take with the client. I'll share, as Chris mentioned, some real use cases from when Chris and I did this with Mass Mutual, and then we'll wrap up and review what we learned. So essentially, it's a really useful tool actually to introduce early on in the sales process. And in the case,
Hey, Jen.
yes.
Okay, so we're going to stop. One problem, I've got your mouse right in the lower right-hand corner of the display window.
Oh, is that
So,
better?
yeah, that's better. So, I am going to, let's back it up one,
Okay.
and let's kick it off again.
Okay.
Back it up too. And let's kick it off again, and I'll edit that out. I still see it in the black border on the side. Can you move it over any further? There you go. At least like that, all the way over like that, it's not noticeable.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right. Let's give it another shot. We'll do another take here.
Take two.
Yep. Here we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to focus on. Okay. Let me try that again. Take three. Sorry. All right. Hello, everyone. In this session, we're going to focus on introducing journey mapping methodology in a sales conversation. Our goal is to learn how to incorporate journey mapping into the sales conversation to introduce the methodology to a prospect or existing brand. I've asked Jen Lockenman to help me out with this today because she and I did an introduction sales meeting with Mass Mutual, and she's got some great insight into how we can position journey mapping in those initial sales conversations. Jen?
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. So as Chris mentioned, what we wanted to talk about today is to just take you through when do you introduce journey mapping in the sales process? How do you do that and incorporate it into your talk track in the sales process? And then what are some of the next steps that you can take with the client, and what are some of the things that the tool and the methodology allow you to do going forward? So it's very valuable. What we found, Chris and I working together with Mass Mutual, was that it was very valuable to introduce the journey mapping methodology early on in the sales process. So we actually introduced this with Mass Mutual during the initial meeting. One of the things that did for us is that right away it focused the meeting around helping the brand reach their goals. So how is LivePerson going to help the brand reach their goals? It made that the focus of the meeting instead of coming from a perspective of just the product or just LivePerson's offerings, but it really resonated with the client on how we're going to come in, understand the process that their customers go through, how we can collaborate with them on that, and then how our engagement solutions can help improve the journey of their customers. I think the second thing that it did for us in this particular case with Mass Mutual is it brought to the table early how to think about a customer journey. And what we learned from that process with Mass Mutual is that our concept of a customer journey and their concept of a customer journey differed a little bit, in the sense that what we might consider to be small steps within a larger journey is something that they would actually consider to be a journey. So it allowed us to have kind of a more meaningful connection with them, to have a richer discussion early on. And then when we planned our follow-ups with MassMutual and our follow-on working session, we had some real substantive things to talk with them about. So how do you do this? How do you introduce and where do you introduce journey mapping in your talk track? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to walk you through our new pieces of our new sales deck and show you where you can potentially introduce journey mapping. You might find a different place to introduce this is useful, but this is just one take on where it might be a nice segue as you're going through your initial sales process with your client. So I won't go through these slides as we would do with the client to save on time, but I'm just going to share with you my thought process on how I put together a logical flow and what made sense to me. So obviously we're starting with a connection exercise. We're providing the customer with an introduction to us, to who LivePerson is and why LivePerson, our vision. The customers that we serve, and the LiveEngage platform. We're talking about here our vision and how the consumer has moved on. So I won't take you again through the whole talk track here because you guys are very familiar with it, but introducing the concept that, you know, things really have changed, and this is the way that they have changed. And this is the movement in consumer behavior that LivePerson's solutions are predicated on. One of the things I do want to stop for just a minute and point out to you here that I thought was useful, and just as a way of sharing this with you, as we were talking about how things are changing in the market and in the industry and with consumer behavior, I tried to do a little homework and find ways that that was happening within the space that is relevant for MassMutual. And I found that that certainly resonated with them. It created some conversations that were meaningful, and they had some comments there in the process that were very helpful to us. So things have changed, but meanwhile, unfortunately, most brands are still forcing people to pick up the phone and call them, and it's not a great experience for all the reasons that you guys are familiar with and that we evangelize here at LivePerson. So there is a disconnect between the consumer and the brand in terms of how the consumer wants to behave and engage, and how most brands are forcing the consumer to engage with them. At this point, talking a little bit about how mobile messaging is not another just omni-channel of communication, but rather it is a continuous connection, and it is that connective tissue, if you will, between the brand and the consumer. But will messaging drive up my costs? Well, actually, no, because what we've found and what the industry is finding is that messaging actually reduces costs for the brand while improving the customer experience. How do I transition from voice to messaging? This is where I think it's a useful segue to start talking about journeys. So one of the things, Mr. Customer, that we will help you do at LivePerson is we'll help you identify those top target journeys that are helpful, that are target journeys for you, that are important to you, and where we can identify some breakpoints in those journeys potentially with your customers, and then how the solution that we bring to bear can make that a better experience, and in turn, obviously impact your business. So this is where it might make sense to then segue into looking at some sample journeys. And this is how we handled it essentially with MassMutual. So again, the goal here is not to take them through a very detailed look at one of their specific journeys, right? Because you're not there yet. You're not there in the sales process. Remember, this is early on in the sales process. This might even be your initial meeting with the client. So the idea here is rather to introduce our journey mapping methodology and to introduce it early to kind of start the conversation. So with that goal in mind, what we're really going to show here is a generic journey, a generic insurance journey in this particular case, with the goal to be increasing revenue. So I'm sorry, Chris, I have to stop.
That's okay.
I gotta address this dog issue.
No problem. Go ahead.
Dan?
So, waiting. We're still recording. I'm going to cut this out. But I don't like silence.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, so if you back up to one more, I think.
How is it sounding?
It sounds great, and it looks great. So
Okay.
let's pick up right here, and then I'll edit that into a separate video.
Okay.
Okay, so start here by so let's pick up right here, and we've been recording the whole time. So whenever you're ready to start, go ahead.
Okay, so this feels like and felt like to us a natural place then to take a look at a sample journey with the client. So again, you're early on in the sales process. This might even be, as it was in the case for us with Mass Mutual, your initial face-to-face meeting. So the goal here is not to go through in detail one of their specific journeys, but rather to use a generic journey for their industry as a way of introducing our journey mapping methodology. And, as I mentioned earlier, also as a way of introducing a richer conversation, give them something to respond to as well. So here in this particular case, we picked a generic insurance journey with the goal to be increasing revenue. So mapping the journey itself, how do you do that? This is a rather simplistic journey. I realize it might be difficult to see. I won't go through every single touch point, but essentially what you see here is a fairly simplistic journey starting with, I want to buy life insurance, and then ending with, I've made a decision on the policy that I want and need. And every step along the way that a consumer might go through as they interact with the brand along that journey. And what's called out here underneath are the various touch points within this journey, and also the sentiment. So how is the customer feeling at the various touch points within this particular journey? Then you can talk them through how to identify potential breakpoints in this journey. And this is where you have the opportunity, I think, to really gain some credibility with the client by saying, we are familiar with these journeys and with your industry, and we have some real data and some real sense of when sentiment might be going down and a process in the journey might be abandoned by your customer, which of course is lost revenue, for the brand. So this is an enhanced version of the journey map that just shows the journey itself with each touch point. And then what you see here are opportunities where the consumer sentiment might go down and the process might be abandoned. So for example, I'm on the website and I need to select my goal before viewing the different options for insurance policies. Well, maybe that's confusing to me and I simply abandon the process. Or I get a little further along the line and now I have to complete and submit a web form. And maybe it's just not a good time for me to do that, or I get confused again and I abandon the process. etc. So at those various points, now we're able to start suggesting where and how a solution like the one that we offer can potentially help in the journey process. So, you can provide proactive and button chat support early on in the process so that if someone does reach a point of confusion in trying to pick a goal, they can get help or they can be offered help. You can offer mobile messaging when chosen to interact with a professional. And then you can offer that again further down the line once they've chosen their professional and they want to now review a policy or they have some further questions. So then you can show them how the application of those particular solutions can actually take what might be a negative experience and a chance for the consumer to abandon the process altogether and raise the sentiment of that experience and turn it into something more positive and keep the consumer engaged in every step of the journey. And again, the goal here is to show them a journey or a process that's certainly relevant to them. And we have some great tools for that now within every industry vertical. But it's not the goal really to show them or to start to explain their particular journey. It's rather to show them how we map a journey, how we map a customer journey, how we think about it. It shows them our expertise and where that comes into play, in addition to where our technology and the application of the technology comes into play. So what do you do after that? Once you've introduced the methodology, what are the next steps that you can take, and how do you focus on journey mapping going forward? Because I really see journey mapping as a tool that is useful to introduce early on in the sales process, and then one that can be used all the way through as the sales process continues and you're starting now to kind of define the scope of a potential project. And I think it's important to think about that. Lots of people in our industry use journey mapping. Journey mapping is not a new concept, but I think the way that we're doing it now with this methodology and our journey mapping tool is really powerful because it's kind of turned into a sales tool early in the journey, and then a tool that you can use with the client as the process continues to keep collaborating and engaging with them. So just to share with you, in the case of MassMutual, what we did as a next step was, that initial meeting was very helpful in getting the discussion rolling. As I mentioned, in getting a definition on the table, a shared view, if you will, of how to look at a customer journey and how to think about a customer journey. And then when we scheduled a working session with them, we were actually able to take some of their feedback about their journeys and map those out a little bit. And that became a very rich discussion in a working session where on their side, they were able to look at that and say, yes, we agree with that, or no, actually, we would handle that differently. And so it was just a way of facilitating, I think, a deeper collaboration. It's difficult sometimes to talk about these things at a conceptual level only. And I think having the visual of the journey mapping is very helpful in kind of making the conversation more tangible and driving home the value of our solution. So with that, I thank you, and I will turn things back over to Chris.
Okay, so we have a problem that we have to back up and fix.
Okay.
Go back a couple of slides. So, okay, down one. So you went from applying solutions right into next steps, and you went to the talk track of number 5, but this is still in your presentation. Your sales deck. It's not in the deck that I put. So go down like 3 slides. And right here, up one, is where I was expecting you to talk about the next step.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
So I can edit that stuff out though. So let's start right here. And if you can start with, okay, now that we've gone through the sales start with, now that we've gone through the sales deck and where it fits into the sales conversation, what is the expectation or outcome of that meeting, right? What's the ask? And go through the slide and then hand it off, and I'll wrap it up. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So take a pause and then start here with that talk track.
Okay, so now that we've talked about where the journey mapping fits in the sales conversation, what are some of the next steps that you can take with the journey mapping process with the client? And what are some of the expectations you can set with the client about how to continue to engage with them with this methodology? So again, the methodology and introducing it early in the sales process, I think, helps to at least begin the conversation of understanding the brand's goals and objectives. And it continues to be a useful tool in that regard all the way through the journey, because now what you can do as a next step is start to select target journeys to map, and then begin to do that mapping collaboratively with the brand or with the client. So in the case of Mass Mutual, for example, after we had introduced the methodology, that allowed us to then go back and plan a working session with them where we picked a few target journeys to map with them collaboratively, and it gave them something very tangible to respond to. So instead of just having a conversation at a conceptual level, we were able to really get a visual going and put something in front of them that, again, was tangible, that produced a conversation where they could respond to something real and say, okay, that makes sense, or no, actually that doesn't make sense, or we might do that differently, or look at that journey differently. And it created a richer conversation as a follow-up working session. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Okay, so I can't cut these into two videos, so we got to go back and start at the beginning of the slide again. I like how you filtered in Mass Mutual, even though we didn't actually do that deeper dive custom journey map yet. I don't want to, but yeah. But I like how you did that. So I think the talk track is really good there. Let's start over with the beginning of this one and try it again. And after you get through the plan, after you get through the outcome, you're just going to hand it off to me. So you can jump to the next slide and hand it off to me, and I'll take it from there.
Okie doke. All right. So now that we've talked about where the journey mapping methodology fits into the sales conversation and how you can introduce it into that conversation early in the process, what is the outcome of that, right? What are the next steps that you can take with the client, and what expectations can you set with them about how you can use this methodology collaboratively with them going forward? So I think that after you've introduced the methodology, it's a great time to then talk about, well, let's identify 1 to 3 different target journeys that we can then use this methodology to map out together and talk about. And it creates the opportunity for a richer conversation. Instead of having a conceptual conversation, you now have a tool and a visual that can create a very tangible view of these journeys and allow you to have a more substantial conversation with the client. And that's kind of what happened with Mass Mutual. So we had a follow-up session with them, and we were able to bring to that some additional journeys that we discussed at the initial meeting that we had tentatively mapped out, and able to collaborate with them on whether or not those journeys made sense and get their feedback on them. So essentially, it allows you to then plan a session where you can bring the methodology and you can bring the industry experience and obviously the solution, and the brand has the opportunity to bring their knowledge about their consumer journey, and together you can then create and analyze target journeys. So with that, I thank you, and I'm going to turn things back over to Chris.
You're on the wrong slide. You're going backwards. So, so
Oh,
that's where I need to land. So like I got to do it again. I'm sorry.
okay, from the
But
top.
yeah. So, and it was great. The talk track was absolutely perfect. So let's try and do it exactly the same way again. And
Okay,
yeah, just go down one slide when you hand it off to me. Don't worry about going back to the Q&A and that stuff.
okay, I just want to make sure I get this right.
We don't need that.
Oh, okay, so I'm going down here.
Yep.
Okay.
So yep. So start on the one prior to that. Start on yep, and then just go to that slide, and that's we'll end it on that slide. So don't do anything until I stop the recording and tell you to.
Okay,
Okay. All right. Sorry.
no problem. Okay, so now that we've talked about how you can weave in the journey mapping methodology into the sales conversation and where you might have an opportunity to do that, let's talk about what happens after that. So, what are some of the next steps you can take using this methodology with the client? What expectations can you set with them about how you can use this methodology together to then map some target journeys? So, one of the nice things about this tool and this methodology is that you now have a tool that you can use to collaborate on with the client. So you have the opportunity to set up as a next step a journey mapping session where you can bring the methodology, the industry experience, and obviously the knowledge of the solutions. And the brand has the opportunity to now bring to the table their knowledge about the customer journeys, the target journeys that they might like to focus on. And together you can use this tool and this methodology to have a substantial conversation. So it's taken something that I think normally occurs at the purely conceptual level, and it's made it a much more tangible and a much richer conversation. So with that, I am going to hand it back over to Chris.
Thanks, Jen. So just to summarize, what we learned about in the session in this session is where in the sales process we want to introduce the methodology to have the greatest impact and get buy-in from the brand. We talked about how we can incorporate it into the sales deck, the right place to incorporate it, and how it transitions into the sales deck. We also talked about the high-level talk track of how you present journey mapping, the methodology, and each of the steps in the methodology. And then finally, Jen reviewed what are the next steps. What's the ask out of the journey mapping exercise or introduction, and how we move that into doing a custom journey mapping exercise, which happens to be the next Grovo training, custom journey mapping for buy-in. So Jen, thank you very much for sharing your insights with MassMutual with us. I think that it really helps to have a real life example of how it worked. And I think you did a great job doing that. So thank you everyone, and enjoy journey mapping.
Thank you, Chris.